Hey everyone, welcome back to Test-Driven Development in React. I'm Josh Justice, aka Coding It Wrong, and as I always say, you can follow along today and find out if that's true or not. I'm glad you're here, watching on the live stream or checking out the recording afterwards, and I'm really excited for today's presentation. In particular, it's going to be one-part stream. We're going to continue on into details, but like everything, the core foundations of what you need for test-driven development in React, it's all going to be in this one stream today. If you are live on the chat, please say hello. Please jump in anytime with questions or comments. I love to interact with folks on the stream, and I love thinking and talking about this stuff. It's really great. So today we're going to jump in. We're going to proceed ahead with the project we set up last time, React TDD live stream, but the title of it is Opinion 8. It's an app where we are tracking restaurants and dishes at those restaurants and whether we like them or not. We're rating those different dishes on 1 to 5 stars. Last time we set up the project with Parcel, Babel, ESLint, Cypress, Jest, and Enzyme. And today we're going to be jumping into actually using them, especially Cypress and Enzyme, to run our tests. I see that V. Romana said hello, and Barto in the house says made it for the first time to the live stream. So hello to both of y'all. Glad you're here. Thank you so much for joining in. This is great timing. So today what we're going to do is we're going to build out our first feature of the app. And we're going to think about it feature by feature, because that's the way we do this in this approach that's called outside-in test-driven development. I have a few resources up here. If you can squint, you might be able to see the titles of them. We'll be looking at some books right at the end of the stream for recommendations for other things to learn. But let's go ahead and jump into the code. So I've got my code base here. I've got Cypress up and running for end-to-end tests, and I actually have Jest up and running up here for the component tests as well. And in outside-in test-driven development like this, what we're going to start with is an end-to-end test, or as I'd like to call it right now, a feature test. The reason I want to emphasize calling it a feature test right now is we're going to walk through what the feature of the app is going to be like for an end user, what they would expect to see and interact with. So to do this, let's go ahead and delete out this smoke test and add a new one. And the feature we're going to start with is creating a restaurant. So we're going to be adding a restaurant to our list of restaurants, and that's what we're going to create the feature for. So we'll just call this feature test adding a restaurant. Here's our file. And now I'm going to give a little bit of detail into how Cypress works as we go through. Not a ton of detail, but enough to get you started. And I'll link to the Cypress docs, and of course you'll see much more of Cypress week to week as we continue on with this series. So Cypress, under the hood, it's an end-to-end test runner that kind of gives you an end-to-end product that handles it all for you, but it doesn't reinvent the wheel when it comes to the built-in tools. So if you've used Mocha.js as a test runner, or if you've used Chai for expectations, or Sign-On for test doubles, Cypress uses all of these under the hood, and so that'll look very similar to you. So we're going to start at this test saying describe, and what do we want to describe? Adding restaurant. Now we're going to write out the steps using Cypress's API for what a user would do. And the thing that we want to confirm is it displays the restaurant in the list. There's going to be a list of restaurants, and when we add a restaurant, it's going to get displayed. All right, so we're going to walk through our steps here. So Cypress provides a CY variable that's sort of the Cypress test runner or browser interactor, and we can call things on that like visit. So we're going to visit our website. It's at localhost 1234. We can configure that with a shortcut a bit later. Maybe we'll look at that in a future week, but for now, this is the most straightforward way to put everything you need to see about the Cypress interaction in one test. So we're going to visit this URL, and then what are we going to do when we get there? Well, probably I would expect, envisioning this in my head, that we'd have some kind of button we would click to add a new restaurant. It's not something that would be right there on the page, but we want to click a button to add it. So we want to get a page element. I'm going to use a data test selector because this is a really reliable way to get elements out of the page. And you'll see how we can use those shortly. Add restaurant. I always use this test example, and I can never spell restaurant correctly. So we're going to get an add restaurant button, and then we're going to click on it. And what are we going to do after that? Well, we're just going to enter a restaurant name. That's enough for now. So we're going to assume we have some kind of field called new restaurant name. Nope, that square bracket is not inside the quotes. Okay, so we're going to get a new restaurant name field, and we're just going to type in new message. Then probably there will be a save button. So let's just copy and paste this add restaurant button. Maybe we'll say save new restaurant button is the name we'll give it. We might change that up later, but that's okay. This is enough to get us started. We don't want to do too much pre-planning using a test-driven development approach. We'll adapt as we go. So we click add restaurant, type in the name, and click save. So what do we want to confirm? I think we want to confirm, first of all, that the page contains, no, not new message. I'm thinking of a different example. Sushi place. It's my favorite restaurant. Or at least it's the non-copyright infringing example I always use. So we want to confirm that the page contains sushi place somewhere on the page. And I think that's enough for now. We may want to check some things about the like a modal or pop-up or something like that disappearing or something. But let's wait on that to see. Let's see what we can do. All right, so Cypress contains sushi place. Again, to walk through this, what the user is going to see is they want to confirm that they can add a restaurant and it's displayed in the list. So in order to do this, we're going to visit this URL, click an add restaurant button, enter the restaurant's name, click save new restaurant, and then confirm that the page contains sushi place, the restaurant name somewhere. In fact, I think I'm going to put that into a variable just for nicety. Let's say const restaurant name, sushi place, just to avoid duplication. We'll put that in here. And that way we can be sure, we're kind of making it clearer in the test that these are definitely the same thing. They're intended to be exactly the same thing. Cool, so let's see Cypress run this test. We open up the Cypress test runner. It's a kind of GUI app. And we see that adding a restaurant spec in a very small font size on your stream, no doubt, but it shows up in the list. So when we click on this, a new Chrome instance is going to open up, and it's going to open up the Cypress test runner. So let's take a second here to see what's happening. On the left-hand side, we get a test running interface. Let me see how big that is on the stream. That's all right. I'll zoom in maybe one more. So on the left-hand side, we can see the adding a restaurant test name shows up, our test suite name, and then our test name displays the restaurant in the list, shows up underneath. We can see below this that our test says we're visiting localhost 1234. And just a note on that, we actually need to run the test runner separately. So using our custom React test setup, Cypress is not set up to start our server on its own. So I've just run yarn start in one tab to start the server, and I ran, what was it? Little typos, but I ran yarn e2e in another tab to run it. So it's able to pull up the app using localhost 1234. So that's coming up just fine. And you can see on the right-hand side that we get sort of a virtual browser address bar there, and we see some actual page content. So this is actually rendering out our page in real time, and this is real interactable DOM. You can inspect stuff, you can get a real DOM inspection. So the availability of our normal browser tools is really nice. You'll see some other cool stuff as we go along in just a moment. Next, we can see the get step in here is shown, where we are trying to get the add restaurant button. And we see that Cypress says, we timed out retrying. We expected to find the element, add restaurant button, but we never found it. So this is our first test failure, and this makes sense given that we wrote our test before our production implementation. So we have written our test and caused it to fail, and then after this we're going to implement it one step at a time. So before we go on to that, one other note I want to say about this feature test is that this is the entirety of what we're going to focus on today. We're not going to build out a whole data layer. We're not going to make our components super robust. We're going to build only enough to satisfy this feature test. And this is part of the outside-in testing approach. It helps keep our code minimal, so we're only building what's needed right now, so that our code is small and is flexible for future change. So the next thing we're going to do to help ensure that our code is minimal is we're only going to write enough production code to fix the current test failure. We're not going to move ahead and build out everything we can think of, just enough to pass this test, or to fix this error. So as we look at the application code, right now we have almost nothing. So we have an almost empty app component. I'm going to actually delete out this existing code, remove the smoke test, and remove all the content in here. We don't need any of this. We don't need this state. Actually, I think in the main thing I had, oh no I didn't, that was just for test purposes. Okay, so now this is really an empty app component. So now we can decide what to do. So where should we put this button to add a new restaurant? I I think we'll probably add routing in at some point in this application. I don't want to add it just yet. In a real production application, I might, but let's not do that now so that we can kind of show this iterative refactoring approach. But I do want to follow this approach in outside-in testing called write the code you wish you had. Now, I don't really wish I had anything directly under the app component here. We know we're going to add more and more functionality and move things around. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a child component in here instead. Let's say, we'll use the wrapping div just for clarity. But in here, let's say we have a, let's call it the restaurant list screen. Maybe screen is the functionality we can use. We call it a screen. That feels kind of React Native. Maybe we'll call it a restaurant list page. So this is just going to allow us to put everything we want for a restaurant list page in one component up here. So let's go ahead and import that. So we're writing the code we wish we had. We're going to make a restaurant list page component here. We import React and component. I'm pretty sure this is going to need some state. So we're going to export a component. We're going to have a render method, and we're just going to return a div and a closing div for the moment. Great. So now we have a restaurant list page, and I think now that we're on this page, I think it's totally fine. I think putting the button in here for now is fine. Maybe we'll move it later, but this works out okay. So we're going to create a button, and now here's how to use that data test attribute. Data is a type of prefix for an HTML attribute that allows you to attach any other data you might want to an element. Now, a lot of our data and state lives inside of React state and data stores and things like that. But selectors for elements, it's a good idea to pull up a data test. This way, if we are using class-based CSS, we're not going to have classes that change for testing purposes and for styling purposes. And even IDs. We might need an ID for something related to DOM manipulation. So this way, the data test attribute is only something we're going to ever need in a test. And so that makes your test nice and robust. Let's copy this add restaurant button. We will give it a label just for visibility. But other than that, we're not going to hook anything else up, because this should be enough to fix the current error in our test. We should now have an add restaurant button that's appearing on the page that we can click on. So let's see if that's the case. We go back to our test, we rerun it. Oh, and now something has gone wrong. I have loaded something incorrectly. Maybe that looks like that. We got an error here in the test runner around that restaurant list page, and it seems like it has not yet resolved it to be able to see it. So maybe Parcel doesn't like me doing things in that order, so we'll just rerun Parcel and see if it catches it. It didn't show a problem, so let's rerun Chrome. Great. Okay, yeah, so this is good to know for my purposes. It seems like if I add an import before the file's there, Parcel's not loving that and won't necessarily rerun. Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that. So now we're able to visit the page. We can see the add restaurant button showing up there, and we're able to click on it. So now our test proceeds to the next step. We're trying to find the element that says new restaurant name, and now we're saying we expected to find the element, but we never found it. Okay, so we need a new restaurant name text field. So let's follow that same principle of writing the code we wish we had. Where do we wish we had that form? So we could put it, and I'm not actually sure, we could put it directly under the restaurant list page component, or we could have a subcomponent that kind of function like an add restaurant form. I think just because I don't always work in React, sometimes I work in Vue.js and sometimes I work in Ember. And so controlled components still feel a little verbose to me. Like I don't love intermixing that in with a bunch of other concerns. So I think just for that purpose, I think that I would really like to have a new restaurant form component. That would be nice to keep that in place. And who knows, probably if we add other fields to our restaurant in the future, probably we would want to add those to the form as well. Maybe some validation as well. Actually, yeah, I think in my previous stream when we did React Native, we added validation in a future episode. And so having that in the form being separate would be good as well. So let's go ahead and write the code we wish we had. We'll do the import this time to make sure that Parcel doesn't complain. We'll do a restaurant form. Let's call it new restaurant form. Maybe we'll make it generic in the future, but this is good for now. This will definitely want want state in it because we'll need that controlled component. Render method, and now again, I just want to get parcel to compile. So there's a new restaurant form component, and now on the restaurant list page, we can import the new restaurant form component, and then we're going to show it right here. So the new restaurant form component will show up down below add restaurant. I can already see some conditionality we're going to want to add into here, but our test isn't driving us to it yet. So that may end up being maybe today if we can fit some in, otherwise maybe in a future stream. So again, let's focus on just the code we wish we had right now to satisfy this test requirement. So we wish we had a new restaurant form, and in that restaurant form, we wish we had an input, type text, and data test is, what was the name of that field? New restaurant name. All right, so now we have a text field of type new restaurant name. So that should be showing up. I think, okay, parcel has not complained, so that's good. So let's see if we rerun our test, what happens now. All right, we're able to click on add restaurant, and then we're able to type in the new restaurant name field. And now we're getting an error that there is no save new restaurant button. So you may already notice a problem, or have thought through a problem as we go through here. I can show it to you by hovering back over these previous steps. Actually, we can't see it because there's no default styling on this text field, which is interesting. I wonder why that is. It might just be because of the zoom level in here. I would think that a text... Oh yeah, there we go. Well, yeah, getting this to show up on here is challenging. The viewport is... All right, so there's some settings we could specify in Cypress to get the viewport to go in place. But regardless, even... So Cypress... Let me hide all these pop-ups. What's going on? I'm clicking on everything. Let me stop. So all I wanted to show you was that as we go through the different steps here, we can click on these different steps in Cypress, and it will show us the different stages in the DOM. I haven't even dug in to see how it does this, like keeps track of it. Like, that's pretty sweet. But we can see if we click on this step here that we have the text field with sushi plates filled in. If we click back on the add restaurant button space, first, the text field is empty. Second, it highlights the add restaurant button, showing that that's what's related to or what's being clicked on. So it allows us to time travel back to the state we were in before. And we can see that the new restaurant name field is already there, it's just hidden. It's not hidden, it's shown in place. So that's unfortunate. The add restaurant button isn't doing anything right now, it's not hiding that field. So I think when we go back at the end, we'll be able to improve our test to make this better, but let's stay focused on the track that we're on. Let's stay focused on addressing this, what the end-to-end test is driving us to. And I think we may even kind of test drive out the hiding of this field in a different way. So for now, let's stay focused. Now we need a save new restaurant button, and I think where to put that is pretty obvious. We'll just add that into our new restaurant form. So we'll add a button here, save. Maybe we'll call that add. Data test. Was it add new restaurant button? Save new restaurant button. That is good. That's going to be helpful when we get into the code. I'll call this save for now just to be parallel. Maybe we'll change that later. So now we have a save new restaurant button showing up in the form. We reload the test. It's all there. We can click on the Save New Restaurant button, and now we see we've gotten past our errors, where something's just not there that we've said needs to be there, and we've gotten to the point where we've got an assertion failure. So we expected to find the content sushi place somewhere on the screen, but we never did. So now we're at the point where there's some behavior in the code, some functionality that's not happening. So when we get to this point, here's where I would recommend in outside-in testing that we should drop down to a lower level test, a component test. And now you'll notice we have implemented components. We created the restaurant list page and the new restaurant form, but all we implemented for them was the render method. We were just kind of showing markup on screen. For things like that seems fine to do, to me, a lot of the time, to do end-to-end tests for. Maybe it would be different if you had a lot of different conditions or things like that. But when it really gets down to the behavior of a component and interactivity, that's when it can be beneficial to have a component test. So let me write that out, and then we'll talk a bit more about the functionality that provides for us. So it's like the end-to-end test is giving us this loop of we made it red, and now we're stepping through to try to get it green. And then as a part of getting it green, we step into a smaller loop where we're doing a component test just for this one component and test driving out functionality for it. So we create a new test in here. Oh, not in the Cypress folder. This is going to be an enzyme test done with Jest over in the unit testing folder. So I'm going to create a new file here. This is new restaurant. I spelled it right. New restaurant form.spec.js. I'm going to put my app spec here because I'm not working in Enzyme day to day, so I'm not as familiar with it. So we'll copy this stuff over. I always have a cheater monitor over up on this hand side with other notes as well, so just know that that is the thing that happens. So we are going to want React imported here because we are going to be using JSX in these component tests. Also, we're going to import the mount function from Enzyme. So Enzyme is a component testing library. It's useful. There's other options, but it's a good one. It's also the only one, as of a few days ago, up until a few days ago, that worked for me for React Native. So that's how I got into using Enzyme a fair amount. So now we're going to import a new restaurant form. Still too lazy to figure out the absolute paths here. So we're just going to do a relative path for now. And now we're going to be describing the new restaurant form component in particular. So what do we want to do here? There could be all kinds of different things about this form that we describe, but right now we're talking about clicking the save button. So what should happen when we click the save button? Well, at this point, what we want to do is take the failure we're seeing at the end-to-end test level and then say, what's the responsibility of this component to get to that end? So is it the form's responsibility to display sushi place on the screen? Well, no, that's not what we're trying to get at. Like that would just roll all the responsibility up in one place. So instead, what's the responsibility of this form? Well, I think what I'd like to do is to have it just collect the data and then send the data back out to the rest of the application for storage and for display. So in React, the most, other than going into a state store, and I don't want to go into a state store yet. We're actually going to refactor to that under test in a future episode. For now, I just want to store the state in components. And so in order to do that, what we want to do is to pass in some kind of function as a property, as a prop that's going to allow us to call it to call back out when the data is saved. So I think I'm going to call that onSave. OnSave or onAdd? Yeah, onSave, because we're in a new restaurant form. We're going to call it onSave. So here's how we're going to do that. You want to create the variable up at the top? We'll do it here. Calls the onSave handler. Yeah. When we click the save button, we want to confirm that it calls the onSave handler. That's the responsibility of this one component. So first, we want to do a save handler. We're going to use jest.fn. So this is a mock function or a jest test double. This is going to allow us to assert that a function was called. So next we're going to call this mount function provided by Enzyme. We're going to pass it JSX. So we're going to again, I'm copying and pasting my other example that I usually work in. So we're going to use the new restaurant form. We're going to say onSave, call the save handler. That's the function that we want to call. And I think that's all we need to pass into the form. So now we're going to reproduce some of the steps for the end-to-end test, the relevant ones, just using Enzyme syntax instead. So again, at the end-to-end test level, we're clicking the Add Restaurant button. That's not part of the form's responsibility, so we'll skip past that. But we're filling in the text field and clicking Save. So those two steps are part of this function's responsibility. So I'm going to pull up my cheater screen here again to take a look at how I do this in Enzyme, because I don't work in Enzyme every day. And this is, we're going to want wrapper. We're going to save this wrapper. For this, that's just a wrapper around the component that allows us to access it. Okay, I don't think we need R-Spec anymore. Okay, so we've got our wrapper. What do we want to do? Wrapper, we're going to call find to find an element. And here we're able to use a CSS selector again. So data test equals, I want to do a single string around here, I think. Message text. And when we get this text field, what do we want to do? Well, there's we can simulate a browser change event, or a React change event, I guess is a better way to say it. And we want to pass in the data. Target, value, new message. And again, this is a bit more verbose than the Cypress test. So whereas the Cypress test looked a lot more like what we identify to a user, find a field and click on it, or find a button and click on it, find a field and type this in, we're working at a bit lower level. We're kind of sending a change event to it instead. So that's a bit more coupled to implementation, but that's all right for now. Maybe we'll experiment with different component testing approaches in the future. So we're simulating that we're changing the text of message text to this. Then what? Then for the wrapper, we're going to find the button. Data test equals save button. I think that's what I called it. Nope, that's definitely not what I called it. And again, looking over at a cheater screen that's about something else is not helping me here. It's the new restaurant name, and it's Sushi Place that we want to type in here. I'm so sorry. It's confusing things to no end. So now we want to, on the button, we want to simulate a click. Again, a bit more verbose than Cypress, but that's all right. So we're filling in the text, we're clicking the button, and then what do we want to do? So we want to say we expect save callback, save handler. Sorry. My window resizer. I just started using spectacles for window resizing, which is amazing, but also it has gotten me in trouble just there. But I think our page is mostly back. We're mostly back. Okay. Actually, I'm going to switch back over to here so we can see R-Spec and see if the spec runs. Okay, so what we're checking here, we're checking the save handler. Expect save handler to have been called with Sushi Place. So that's what we want to happen. When we submit this form, we want the onSave handler to be called, and we want to pass it the name of the restaurant. That'll allow the rest of our app to store that restaurant's information. So I'm going to save this test, and we'll see if I've gotten it working with Jest and Enzyme here. All right, we're going to get rid of this existing app spec because we don't need that either. And I think we just want to rerun Jest actually to catch that new file. It's coming up. All right. Failed the parse selector. So I just have a typo here. I missed a square bracket. So we'll save that again. Our Jest test reruns. And notice that it reruns on save, which is great. We can scroll up just a tad. So now we're saying here that everything else in here is passing, which makes sense because we added this text field and button as a part of our end-to-end test. But now we expected the mocked function to have been called with the argument Sushi Place, but it was not called. So now this is great because now we've gotten a red failing test at the component test level. We've gone out into our inner loop of red-green refactor, and we've made things red. We've managed to show the functionality we need to happen at the component level. And so now we can make this happen. We can jump back over to our component and do that. So I think what we're going to do next is to actually get a controlled component working because we want to cover this. We want to get access to the input from this text so we can change, so we can send it back out. So state equals input text. And I'm going to do destructuring here. So we got our input text, and that's going to be the value here. And then on change of the text field, we do handle text change. Handle text change is going to be class property arrow function. Hopefully I have support for that in Parcel. If not, we'll get to step into some build functionality. That'll be fun. And then from here, we're going to get onSave from props, input text from state, and then we're going to call onSave with input text. And that should be enough to pass the test, assuming that I type things in right. So let's save and see. The test reruns. Okay. Expect the mock function to have been called with Sushi Place as argument 1, but it was called with click. Oh, and of course, this is because I've mixed things up. This is not handling the text change. This is handling the save. So let's delete this out. All we need to do here is this.set state input text should be set to event target value. This is what's going to overwrite the input text in the state with the state here. So now we want to implement what happens in the button when we click it. So here, we're going to do on click. This handle save. Handle save. We don't need to pass any arguments to that. And this is where we're going to want to say input text from state on save from the props, and we call on save with the input text. This is, I think, what we want. So let's see if this passes the test now. And it passes. This is great. All right, so it seems like, as far as we can tell, that in our component, we've now specified that the component will call the save handler and pass the sushi place message back out. So let's think about this again. What do we gain by component testing this? We could have just stayed at the end-to-end testing level, and we would have had the same level of confidence that things were working. We would have been able to confirm that sushi place was sent back out and sent where we needed to go in the application. So one benefit of the component level test is that it allowed us to take a smaller step. So instead of having to implement all the state management and a separate display component and things like that, we were able to test just one piece of the data flow, which is that the new restaurant form has a save handler that it calls to send the data back out. So taking a smaller step is one benefit of component testing. The other benefit is to keep our code changeable. So we've now specified the behavior of this one component apart from the rest of the application. This means that the new restaurant form we can use anywhere else we want to, or change how it's used, and we can be confident that it still works internally as well. We've also been able to confirm the interface of it is simple. We've been able to tell that all that's happening here is just that data is being sent back out through a prop. We've documented that we're not connecting to a state store or doing anything more complex like that. It's just a simple function that we're calling. So it's often said that unit tests or component tests help us with the internal quality of our app, whereas end-to-end tests and feature tests help us with the external quality, making sure things work from the standpoint of the user. Unit tests and component tests help us with the internal quality, making sure we have well-designed pieces that are pluggable and flexible. So that's some of the reasons you might want to follow outside-in testing and step down a component level of your test. All right, so now let's step back up to our end-to-end test. We can do this by going, well, Cypress is actually still running it, so we can switch back into Cypress and rerun our end-to-end test or our feature test. So we have now a giant blow-up, and so we're going to want to dig into this. So this says, uncaught type error, onSave is not a function. And if you think about this for just a moment, this makes sense. We've added an onSave prop that's required into the new restaurant form, but we haven't added it up at the restaurant list page. So this is actually great. This is just fine. This is exactly the kind of thing we want our feature test to catch for us. So the next thing we want to do is to go back to that principle of only writing enough code to fix the current failure. That's going to keep us nice and focused. So the simplest way we can do that is to take our new restaurant form and add an onSave prop to it. We'll call it this handle add restaurant. And right now, we're just going to not add any functionality. We're going to add just a function in there that is going to allow our test to hopefully pass again. We'll rerun our test. It's incredibly fast. And we can see that the app is no longer blowing up. And now we're back to the previous failure where the end-to-end test was trying to find the text sushi place on the page, but never did. So this is progress. So previously, this test was failing because we weren't doing anything with the data on the form. Now the test is failing because we aren't doing anything with the data in the callback that's sent up to the restaurant list page. So I think what we want to do here is to store the state in the restaurant list page. That's going to be fine for now until such a time as we kind of switch to a state storage. And again, our end-to-end test covering us is going to make sure we don't break anything in that future refactoring. So this is nice. Just think about this. Have you been in a situation where in an app you weren't sure what kind of state store you needed at first? Maybe it was obvious that you needed Redux or Apollo, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a small exploratory evolutionary app and you wanted to see how far you could go just storing data in this component state itself. So test-driven development helps you with that because it allows you to start small and refactor with confidence when you want to add a different state layer later. So we're going to start small. We're going to add state on here. We're going to add restaurants, and it's just going to be an array. And now in handle add restaurant, Randall restaurant, speaking like Scooby-Doo, new restaurant, name is what we'll take in. So what are we going to do in here? Well, we're going to set state, that's for sure. We're going to take in a state variable and update it. And then I'm going to put the window resizing. I think I need to turn that off for the sake of live streams. We're going to add our brackets here. So what's going to be the new state of restaurants? Well, we're definitely going to spread the current state restaurants. So what's the new restaurant that we're going to add in? Well, again, from a refactoring standpoint, certainly in a real application, a restaurant would store more data than just the name itself. But for the sake of keeping things as small as possible, I think I'm going to just store the names in here for now. And actually, to help with clarity on that, though, I think I am going to name the field restaurant names. That's going to help us to remember that it's not a full restaurant object or anything. All right, so we've got restaurant names. That's an empty array. And when we change here, when we add a new restaurant this way, we're going to spread that array out and add the new restaurant name into the list as well. So this should store the restaurants in the list. Now I like to save it. I could rerun it. Unless it blows up, I'm pretty sure nothing will have gone wrong. But we can retest this just to make sure. Did anything blow up? Nope, nothing blowed up. We're still getting the same error, so that's fine. So now, as far as we know, we could debug with the React tools if we wanted to, but as far as we know, the restaurant name is being stored on the state here. So the next step would be to render it out. And I think at this point, we can go back to the write the code you wish you had approach. I don't really want to show the restaurants in the list here. I'd love to have a separate component because this is the restaurant list page. And I know it's not technically a container component because it does have some markup, but I like the idea of decomposing it into just some very simple concerns at this level, and then we'll go down to have these other specialized components with more details. And once we start like styling the list page as well, we're going to need to do some more. So let's say we want a restaurant list. Actually, let's not put it in here just yet because we don't want Parcel to yell at us. So let's create a new restaurant list. Hopefully that won't be confusing with the restaurant list page contains a restaurant list. We can always rename it later if we need to. And end-to-end tests don't mind about renaming, except that Parcel will blow up if we get the imports wrong. So I'm sure there's a better way to set that up with Parcel. In this case, I'm going to just import React not component. I'm actually going to use a stateless functional component here. A, because I know this component is going to be display only, and B, it'll be fun to see the differences with stateless functional components as it comes to testing. So here we're going to make a restaurant list. Let's just do nothing for the moment. Have it return null. This is just enough to get a restaurant list. And now on the restaurant list page, now we're going to import restaurant list. And now here, we're going to take the restaurant list. And what do we want to do? Well, we probably want to say restaurants. And we can pull the restaurants, destructure them out of state right here, and pass them down here. All right, so I think this will not cause Parcel to break. Let's just check and see. It did. What did I do wrong? Restaurant list page. What did not like restaurant list page? The app. Oh, that was earlier. That was before the rebuild. Yeah, we got the rebuild. We're good to go. Let me go down like this so I don't confuse myself again. Okay, cool. So now again, we could rerun the test if we want to, but I think we'll be fine. So in the restaurant list, we now want to display the restaurants. And we're displaying them. And we're just going to do, again, I am not a person who is good at styling. I'm very terrible at it. That's going to actually be a great excuse to look at some React component libraries coming up for visual components. But in the meantime, I'm going to do the minimum possible thing. Again, I just want to get the functionality passing to get this test passing. And then once the tests are green, I can do any refactoring that I might want to do there. So for right now, this is going to be a simple unsorted list, unnumbered list, I should say. We're going to have a list item. Actually, we're going to do, I still don't know how I prefer to kind of format this. Restaurants. I can't spell restaurants to save my life. We're going to map through those. Go to restaurant. And then here we're going to have li with a key of just the restaurant. Let's call this restaurant name. Just for clarity for us. And then we're just going to output restaurant name. Of course, this key is not going to work in the long run if we have duplicate restaurant names, but this is going to be enough for us right now to get the test passing. So with this, I think this will actually make our end-to-end test pass if I've gotten all the syntax correctly. And Parcel's making me a bit nervous with the fetching packages here, but we'll see. Let's rerun our end-to-end test. Yeah, sure enough, parcel seems to be hanging. So this is hanging, so that's okay. Let's just go back through here. Yeah, it's still running, linking dependencies. I sometimes have issues. I have a virus scanner on my machine. Sometimes it keeps my machine busy, so then I force quit the virus scanner, and it'll always come back momentarily. You can see as soon as I force quit it, the tests start running again. So I just want to execute that remote code on my machine. This is interesting. All right, we're running, we're loading. That's very interesting that actually stopped there. I'm gonna force quit it one more time. Stream still seems like it's okay. Hopefully y'all can still see me. Built in 1 millisecond. That's very optimistic. That's great. That is exactly how long it took, yes. Okay, so now I'm getting an error. Cannot read property map of undefined. So that's just some kind of simple syntax error I have. That is, or functionality error. Let's see here. Restaurant names. Ah, yeah, that's what it is. I didn't extract the right key name here. Restaurant names. And let's go ahead and call the property restaurant names there as well. Let's just pass it all the way through for clarity. All right, now when we rerun our end-to-end test, it goes through and it's succeeded. This is great. So we can see that Sushi Place is showing up on the screen in the list, so we're good to go. Incidentally, we could actually see, because Sushi Place was still shown in the text field, we could actually see that was not being detected as a part of the value of an input. It was just checking for Sushi Place on the screen. So this is actually great. So we've got our end-to-end test passing. And let's just make sure that our jest test has not been broken as well, that our component test is still passing as well. Hit return, and that's still passing too. So now we're done. Our first feature, we've actually managed to do an end-to-end test and a component test inside it. So let's walk back through and see how that went. So in our adding a restaurant end-to-end test, we were able to specify things from a user's standpoint. We stepped through the list of what they would want to see, that you can add a restaurant, then click add restaurant, type in the name, click save, and then the restaurant would show up on the screen. As a part of doing that, we let the end-to-end test drive us through a few different steps. It drove us to write the code we wish we had to create a restaurant list page that had a new restaurant form. But then once we got into the new restaurant form, we started getting the functionality to actually handling the save and sending the calling save to call the onSave function property to send the data back out of the component. And then at that point, we stepped down to a component test implemented using Enzyme. So here we were able to implement the fact that on the form, when we enter the text and click save, the save handler was called, and we got lower level coverage there in the component test. So that was able to confirm for us what our form does in and of itself, independently of what the rest of the application needs. So that was really helpful, and we've got our test passing and everything is working. So this is great. We still have a little while on the stream, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit these changes, and then I'm going to go through and we're going to do a little bit of cleanup. But I want to commit this first. So let's see what changed. We actually had something change in the package JSON. So let's see what that is. Blob util. I think that is something that happened through an autocomplete that I did actually. So let's actually undo that change and make sure things still work. I love to review my changes as I commit, just to make sure that everything was intentional. That was definitely not intentional. I think that's why partial actually tried to rerun. So let's restart that. I'm going to restart Cypress as well. And I'm going to make sure with this change that all the tests still run just fine, because I want that safety, that guarantee. Incidentally, notice that we didn't have to pull up the application directly ourselves in a browser. I didn't feel much of a need to, because we could actually see it in the Google Chrome that Cypress started up. While we're biding time waiting for Cypress to start up, I'll go ahead and pull this up over here too. Let's just hide that. There we go. Hide that bookmarks toolbar. And so we can see the app is coming up here, but that's enough of Firefox right now. We're going to open up the Add Restaurant spec and have that open in Chrome. Now this pulls up in here. It's going to take just a second to start up and get running. And it runs through our tests and things are still passing. So that's great. So we were able to remove an unnecessary change to our package JSON. So that's great. Okay, so let's review our changes here. I see that I removed some existing files, so let's actually do that. I'm not walking myself through here. I'm actually getting confused by this other screen. So let me just do this so you can see it up in here. Okay, we're going to add the deletion of this smoke test. We're going to add the deletion of this R-Spec. Add this smoke test. So all of this commit is just removing these. Remove smoke tests. So we're going to commit that. And I've created a new branch already, creating a restaurant for this. So let's check the status here. We have a change in the app source. We add an integration folder with the test. And then we add the new restaurant form, restaurant list page, and our unit test. So that all looks fine. Let's just check and see what the changes are in app.js. We're changing that we are removing some of this existing code and we're adding in the restaurant list page. So that all seems fine. And all our changes are good there, like add a restaurant is good for the name of that commit. So let's go back to some of that cleanup that I mentioned. Now that we've finished kind of getting this test to pass, what else can we do to clean it up? Well, it's not very great that the form is always shown on the screen here. So I don't love that. And so I think what I want is when we click add restaurant, I want that little adding box to show up. Probably in place of the add restaurant button. I think that'd be really nice. So what can we do for that? I think what I want to do is drive that out from the end-to-end test. And what we can do is first here, confirm new restaurant name field is not shown. And then down here, after we click save, we're going to confirm that it's not shown again. I don't recall off the top of my head how to do that in Cypress, so let's just Google that real quick. Confirm element not present. So we're going to search confirm that the element is not present. Let's just Google this. Okay, here we go. Cypress get should not exist. So that's great. Let's try that out, and certainly we'll see this fail if this doesn't work, because it will. All right, so we're going to say get new restaurant name should not exist. And let's go ahead and paste that down here. Let's see if we got that. Maybe we'll clean this test up a bit more later to make sure it's more readable. All right, check it out. Expected the input not to exist in the DOM, but it was continuously found, meaning it was there and it stayed there. So this is great. Now we can test drive this. We want to get that to hide. Now what can we do? Again, going through one step at a time here to make sure that we just do the bare minimum to get this the current failure to be fixed. This is going to definitely be a temporary thing, but what we can do here, just to get the bare minimum to get that to happen, is we can say return null. It's very interesting because this entirely breaks our new restaurant form, but that's okay. We're going to see what happens here. So check this out. Now our end-to-end test said, oh yeah, at first the new restaurant name is not in the DOM, but now after we click the add restaurant button, now we are looking for it in the DOM and we never found it. So now we're at the point where our test is forcing us to have this element sometimes not show and sometimes show. And I think we can put that in. I feel comfortable, because this is kind of like a page component, I feel comfortable putting this in at the page level. Yeah, let's do this. I know that like DOM certainly can get complex over time, but let's just implement this directly in our JSX here and then see how we like it. I think what I want is another state variable. And it's going to be called show new restaurant form. It's going to be set to false by default. And so what we're going to do here is at the top of the page, actually our test isn't driving us to hide the button, so I won't do that yet. We're going to say, I'll do the ternary thing, I guess. We'll pull out the new restaurant names and the show new restaurant form from the state. We'll say show new restaurant form. If that's the case, we're going to put this in. Otherwise, null. It doesn't like that spacing, so we're going to need to make that better. I like this. That spacing looks fine. Fine enough to me. Actually, I wonder if we could even just do this. No, it doesn't like that. 12 of 14. I think I like the parentheses around that. We'll hopefully change this later. So if we are showing the new restaurant form, then render it out, otherwise render null. And I think this will actually, well, no, this won't pass the test because we're not ever changing the value of that. So now we want on here, on click equals this.handle add, not handle add restaurant, let's say handle show new restaurant form. That's a good function name. So if we call handle show new restaurant form, what we want to do is set the state. The state to be show new restaurant form true. So when we click the button, we want to show the form. And I think this will pass the current error that we're getting in the end-to-end test. Nope, doesn't look like it. Okay, so let's see what happened here. So add new restaurant button, but new restaurant name is still not shown. So let's troubleshoot. Show new restaurant form is set to false by default. If we click handle show new restaurant form, then we call show new restaurant form, we set it to true. Then if that's true, coming out of the state, new restaurant form should be rendered. And yet it's not rendered. All right, so if anybody watching the stream can tell what I'm doing wrong, please jump in. Otherwise, I'm going to get into some troubleshooting. I think what I'm going to do, console log handle show new restaurant form. And I'm just going to confirm that show new restaurant form is actually called. Let's move this down to the bottom. No, I like it better over on the side. All right, so let's see if that happens. We rerun the test. Handle show new restaurant form is included. Oh, is it, am I not returning it or something? If we are showing new restaurant form. Okay, so let's do this. Let's log out show new restaurant form in the render method here. It was false, and then it was true, and yet although it's true, new restaurant form is not being rendered out. Well, let's try without the parentheses. Usually I don't use ternaries like this for rendering. It kicks off the render again. And this is great. So, notice I don't have to manually rerun the test to troubleshoot this. It is kind of nice in this circumstance. I didn't plan this. I prefer to have it working, but it's nice that I can rerun my end-to-end test as I go to quickly get me back to the point of the failure. Oh, that's right. So, okay, here's what happened. So we had gone in the new restaurant form, I had set it to return null. But now that we have the hiding and the showing handling at the restaurant list page level, we don't need it in here anymore. So we can take that back out. Now I think we'll be good. Yeah, okay, we've made it farther. So something else is failing now. I'm going to take out these log statements before we forget. And we'll come back to that failure. Great. Couldn't have planned it better. Nice to show off what happens when you don't know what's happening. It's good. All right, we'll hide those dev tools. So now, when the page starts, the element does not exist in the DOM. Then we click Add Restaurant, and it is added. We type it in, and now we're confirming. We're trying to check that element is removed from the DOM at that point. So I think that should be pretty straightforward. All we need to do on the restaurant list page is when we're handling the add restaurant, we want to set show new restaurant form to be false at that point. And I think that'll do it. Let's rerun our end-to-end test, and it passes. This is great. Okay, so let's see. I want to see this. I mean, we could interact with it just right in Cypress here, but let's open it in a new browser. Let's actually open up localhost 1234. I'll zoom in. We got a page. We can click Add Restaurant. We type in a name, and it shows up. Add a restaurant again. Type in another name, and it's added to the list. So this is great. Our functionality is working. Let's kind of review our changes. Actually, I think I do want to recheck the jest test to make sure the component tests are still working. Would that be in here? Yeah. Yarn test. Might need to watch in case I mess something up. That's right. We called it unit. It's running through, and it passes. That's great. All right, so let's review our changes and make sure they all make sense. So in the test, we added in a check that the new restaurant name field doesn't exist, and then a test that it should not exist again afterwards. And then in our class, for our page, we added a show new restaurant form flag to the state. We handle when it clicks to show it, and we handle hiding that again when we submit the form. And now in here, let's split this up. So in our render method, we pull out the show new restaurant form as well. We add functionality to the add restaurant button, and then we conditionally show it down here. Okay, I think that's good for now. Let's commit this. Conditionally show new restaurant form. Cool. All right, so that's added in. We definitely have more cleanup that we can do. So we're going to go through and do next time we get together. It's going to be not this Friday, but next Friday. I don't have the date in front of me, but I'll post that later so we can be ready to go. So we're going to proceed on from here doing cleanup while we're under test. I don't love the fact that, that on the page here, we have this showing conditionally in here. So I'm going to think through that, how we could refactor that around. Maybe we can move the hiding and showing of it into the new restaurant form itself. Maybe not. I'm not really sure. So we'll meditate on that in the next week and a half and come back together. A little more wrap up. I am going to push up a pull request for this to the repo. So please check that out if you want to follow along. It's codingitwrong/React TDD live stream. Those pull requests are going to be there. The commit history is going to be there for you to dig in. So a few other references as I promised. One, if you're interested in this outside-in testing approach, this is the original book that it came from, Growing Object-Oriented Software Guided by Tests by Steve Freeman and Nat Price. This book is what first introduced this approach, and it has a ton, especially the first 6 or 7 or 8 chapters, a ton of information on the philosophy of why test-driven development in general, and why outside-in test-driven development, how it differs from some older forms of test-driven development. In particular, it's been really helpful for me as I've been thinking through it, preparing for a conference talk I have coming up, to think through what test-driven development provides above and beyond just doing testing, writing tests after your functionality. So I highly recommend it from a theory standpoint. It also gets into the object-oriented approach for modularizing software that this leads you to have different modules that are pluggable and reusable. And there's a lot of overlap with the component-based model like we use in React from that standpoint. Another book that I'd recommend is called Effective Testing with R-Spec 3. It's by Myron Marston and Aaron Dees. So this book, I actually got the chance to do tech review for it, and I'm so excited about that. It's a phenomenal book. This book, I recommend it to people regardless of what language they use. It's not about JavaScript, just like Growing Object-Oriented Software is not language specific, but it's not about JavaScript either. This one is actually about Ruby. But it's not really about the language so much as about principles of outside-in testing on the web. So whereas Growing Object-Oriented Software is not specifically about web applications, this book, Effective Testing, has web application specific steps in it, and it's really useful in that regard. I'd recommend it because it has links and references to every good article that I've seen on testing. Well, not everyone, there's good ones as well, but some of the most important articles on testing trade-offs that I've run across. So this is definitely my one-stop shop for testing advice. I highly recommend it. You will benefit from going through it. And so, this is another resource to check out. You can also just walk through the testing with me in future live streams as we go through this extended test together. We're going to build out this application in a very thorough way. We're going to build refactor to different state storage solutions. We're going to start making web service requests and show how we can stub those out using Cypress and what to stub out and what not to stub out. It's going to be a great time together. And so I really recommend that you join up with us. Follow me on Twitch. Check out my YouTube channel. It's going to be available in the links here. All the recordings from the series are going to be posted up there, and I hope that this becomes a sort of ongoing reference to this type of testing. You can also follow me on Twitter at codingitwrong. I tweet a lot on there, and so I recommend that you see that. If you want entertainment or just dumb jokes, that would be a good place to connect as well. But please feel free to reach out anytime. I love talking about testing, and I love talking about the web and Cypress, and so I'd love to hear from you. What works for you? Have you tried any of these approaches? Do you think test-driven development would help? Does it seem like it would not help you? Either way, I'd love to hear from you. So thanks so much for everybody that joined on the stream, and I look forward to seeing you a bit later. We'll just catch base with you next time. Thanks so much. And now, let's go to the slide. Where'd it go? See ya.